When Officer Blake vanished on patrol, everyone feared the worst. But out of the darkness came a stray German shepherd no one had ever seen, until he led rescuers straight to a hidden cellar. What happened next stunned the entire department, and proved that heroes can come from anywhere. It started as a quiet evening shift, his voice calm as he reported a suspicious vehicle parked on the edge of the old timber yard. Dispatch logged it like any other call, routine, unremarkable. But 20 minutes later, his squad car was found abandoned, driver's side door hanging open. The radio lay on the seat, crackling with static. Blake's flashlight was on the ground, its beams slicing a line across the frost-covered dirt. By the time backup arrived, a cold wind had picked up, rattling the tin walls of the empty warehouses. Search teams fanned out in every direction, calling his name until their voices turned hoarse. Dogs were brought in, but the trail was thin and tangled. Captain Harris stood by the car, rubbing his temples as his breath clouded in the freezing air. Blake was one of their best, steady, respected, the kind of man everyone trusted to come home. But hours passed, and there was no sign of him. No footprints leading away. No sounds in the darkness, but the restless shifting of the search dogs. It was as if he'd vanished into the cold night without a trace. Just after midnight, when most of the search team had started to regroup by the cruisers for a new strategy, someone noticed movement along the tree line. A dark shape emerged slowly from the shadows, sniffing the frozen ground. First, they thought it was one of their K9s. But as the dog crept closer, the handlers realized this German shepherd wore no collar or vest. His ribs showed beneath a thick winter coat, and an old scar crossed his muzzle. He looked like he'd been living wild for months. He stopped a few yards away and lifted his head, watching them with eyes that glowed amber in the flashlight beams. No one spoke. The wind rattled the branches overhead, and the dog just stood there, silent and steady, as if he'd been waiting for them all along. Captain Harris took a slow step forward, palm open. The dog didn't retreat. Instead, he sniffed the air, then looked back over his shoulder toward the darkness between the trees. A young deputy whispered, "What's he doing out here?" No one knew. But when the stray turned back again and let out a single, sharp bark, it felt less like a question and more like a command to follow. For a moment, no one moved. Then the dog turned, trotting purposefully toward the trees. He paused just inside the shadows and looked back, his breath steaming in the glow of their flashlights. Captain Harris exchanged a tense glance with the nearest handler. "We've tried everything else," he murmured. "Let's see where he wants to go." Slowly, the search party followed. The dog led them past the old timber yard fence and into the dense undergrowth beyond, weaving between frozen blackberry canes and fallen branches. Every few yards, he'd stop and sniff the air, nose working side to side. Then he'd glance over his shoulder to be sure they were still behind him. After about 15 minutes, he halted abruptly and began circling a patch of ground where the snow was disturbed in a wide arc. The handlers shone their lights closer. There, beneath the crust of ice, lay a heavy boot print. It was a single track, but it was fresh. The dog sniffed the print, then lifted his head and whined. For the first time all night, hope stirred in Captain Harris's chest. They finally had a trail. The stray pressed his nose to the ground and began moving again, this time at a faster pace. He slipped through the brambles with effortless grace, never hesitating even when the path narrowed to a tangle of brush. Behind him, boots crunched over the frozen leaves. Every man and woman in the line felt their breath catching in their chests, because, for the first time, they were following something real. Not a theory or a hunch. A living guide. Twice, the dog paused to sniff at broken twigs or scrape at the snow. Each time, he let out a low, urgent whine that pulled them forward. Hours passed in this steady pursuit, the night cold enough to burn skin. But no one dared suggest turning back. The stray never faltered, and neither did their faith in him. Just before dawn, the dog rounded a thicket of fir trees and stopped dead. His body went rigid, ears pinned forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Captain Harris lifted a hand, signaling the team to halt. In the silence, he could hear it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking from underground. The stray turned, eyes fierce. He had brought them to something important. The dog lunged forward, paws scattering snow as he began to dig beside a rotting wooden pallet half buried in frost. Splinters flew as he tore at the boards, his claws working with desperate urgency. Two deputies joined him, shoving aside the debris until a rough metal hatch was revealed, rust flaking from its hinges. The rhythmic tapping grew louder, echoing. From beneath their boots, Captain Harris dropped to one knee, pressing his ear to the cold iron. "Blake!" he shouted, voice cracking. A muffled voice answered, hoarse and ragged. "Here. Help." The deputies worked frantically to pry the hatch open. The stray stepped back just far enough to let them work, but never took his eyes off the door. His sides heaved, breath coming in sharp clouds. At last, with a groan of strained hinges, the hatch yawned open. A wave of stale air rushed out. Flashlights pierced the darkness below. Officer Blake was there, tied at the wrists, blindfolded, and shivering so violently he could barely lift his head. Captain Harris swallowed hard. "You found him," he whispered to the dog, voice thick. The stray merely sat down, tail thumping. Once in quiet triumph. Two deputies climbed down first, their boots landing with a hollow thump on the packed dirt floor. One of them gently lifted Blake's chin, checking his pulse while the other cut the ropes binding his wrists. "Hang on, buddy," the deputy murmured. "You're safe now." Blake's lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes fluttered open, beneath the blindfold, and when they finally pulled it away, he squinted up at the flashlight beams. Relief flooded his battered face. Above ground, the stray inched closer to the hatch, peering down as if he needed to see for himself that the man was alive. Captain Harris laid a hand on the dog's back, feeling the tremor of cold and adrenaline in those tense muscles. When they hoisted Blake up into the dawn light, the German shepherd rose on his hind legs, pressing his front paws against the stretcher. His nose brushed Blake's cheek as if offering comfort. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the deputies wiped at their eyes, unable to pretend it was just another rescue. Blake's cracked voice rasped out two words, "Good dog." The stray lowered his head, tail swishing through the snow like a quiet salute. The paramedics worked quickly, wrapping Blake in blankets and checking his vitals. He winced when they touched the bruises on his ribs, but managed to squeeze Captain Harris's hand. "Didn't think you'd find me," he rasped, voice weak but steady. Harris nodded, his throat too tight to answer. The stray sat close, watching every movement with solemn eyes. When one of the medics brushed snow from Blake's hair, the dog leaned in and rested, his head gently against the officer's arm. Blake blinked, his eyes glistening. He lifted a shaking hand and let it rest on the dog's broad neck. "Thank you," he whispered. No one said a word. The dawn light spread over the clearing, catching the frost on the dog's fur like a halo. For that moment, it didn't matter that he had no name or home. He was a hero. 2 weeks later, Officer Blake stood on the steps of the animal shelter, his arms still in a sling. The German shepherd looked up at him through the kennel door, tail sweeping the floor in cautious hope. Blake knelt, ignoring the ache in his ribs, and unlocked the gate.